Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through stacks of information to pull out the key nuggets, helping you get informed fast. Today, we're plunging into something unfolding. Right now, it's shockwaves, really, through global diplomacy and trade. The 2025 United States-India crisis. We've looked at articles, reports, official statements, you name it, to bring you a clear overview of this, well, pretty unexpected tension between two major players.
Exactly. And this isn't just some passing political headline. It's actually a fascinating case study. You see how economic leverage, energy policy, and, a nation's strategic independence can really collide. It reshapes alliances, global trade, everything. So our mission today is to help you understand the core triggers, the immediate impacts, economic and political, and the sort of broader ripples this crisis is causing. We're drawing from sources like the Times of India, Al Jazeera, and various analytical reports.
Yeah, we'll explore why the U.S. and India, who seem to be getting closer and closer, suddenly find themselves in this really acute tension. And what this unexpected turn means for you, whether you're involved in international corporations or just watching world events unfold. Okay, let's unpack what triggered this dramatic escalation. The crisis really properly kicked off, in August 2025. That's when the U.S. Trump administration slapped these sweeping tariffs on Indian exports. Initially, it was 25%. They called it a reciprocal tariff. But then, almost immediately, an additional 25% penalty was added. And that second one was specifically tied to India continuing to import Russian oil. So you're looking at a staggering 50% total duty. That's huge, among the highest imposed on any trading partner.
Yeah, it's massive. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how fundamentally different foreign policy philosophies have just collided. You've got the transactional America First approach clashing head-on with India's deeply ingrained strategic autonomy. And this creates a rift that goes way beyond just tariffs. It challenges the very basis of their long-term strategic alignment. I mean, for decades, the U.S. and India had been strengthening their relationship. Think about the quadrilateral security dialogue. That was largely aimed at balancing China's influence.
Right.
But India's commitment to strategic autonomy, well, that meant it was also deepening ties with countries like Russia and the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, even when the West was putting on pressure. So there was this quiet sort of underlying friction building up for a while.
And it wasn't always this bad, was it? I mean, just earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi visited the U.S. in February 2025. Both sides were setting these ambitious trade targets, talking about Mission 500, hitting $500 billion in trade by 2030. So what specific events then pushed this friction into a full-blown crisis? It seems to come down to a series of, well, diplomatic snubs and some pretty contentious claims.
Exactly. Like mid-June 2025, after the G7 summit, President Trump invited PM Modi for a stopover dinner in Washington. Modi respectfully declined, cited pre-existing commitments. He was heading to Odisha, referred to it as the land of Lord Jagannath.
Right.
Though during the same call, Modi invited Trump to India for the Quad summit, and Trump apparently accepted at the time.
And then there was that Operation Sindoor thing earlier in the year.
Right. After the Pahalgam attack back in May, a ceasefire was reached. President Trump publicly claimed he mediated it, but India pretty swiftly rejected any U.S. role in the military talks. Ouch. So, you take these perceived diplomatic slights, add India's continued Russian oil imports, its active participation in BRICS. It visibly frustrated the Trump administration.
Yeah, you can see how that would build.
And it really turns what looks like a trade dispute into something much more personal, much more strategic. U.S. Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett explicitly linked the tariffs not just to trade imbalances, which is the usual line, but also to pressuring Russia over Ukraine. And then White House advisor Peter Navarro stirred things up, controversially calling the Ukraine conflict Modi's war. He argued Indian refiners were making huge profits from Russian oil, essentially funding Russia's war machine. That really personalizes it.
Wow, Modi's war. That's strong language. So, okay, how has India responded to this, well, pretty significant pressure?
Well, they hit back hard. On August 4th, 2025, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs released a statement, called the U.S. tariffs unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Strong words. India firmly asserted its right to an independent energy policy grounded in that strategic autonomy principle. They basically said importing Russian oil was necessary. Affordable energy for 1.4 billion people amid global supply disruptions. You can't just turn that off.
Okay, so a strong rebuttal on principle.
And they also raised a point about sort of double standards. India pointed out that the U.S. and the EU themselves maintain substantial trade with Russia, things like uranium, palladium, fertilizers, stuff that didn't necessarily have the same critical need for affordable energy for the whole population, and they weren't facing the same kind of criticism.
Interesting point.
Plus, they highlighted that senior American officials, like Treasury Secretary Yellen back in 22 and Ambassador Garcetti in 24, had previously seemed okay with India's Russian oil buys. They saw it as helping stabilize global energy markets, aligning with U.S. objectives then. So the sudden shift is stark.
Right, so they're pointing out perceived inconsistencies, but what about the actual impact? What's the tangible economic fallout from these 50% tariffs for India?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And the warnings are serious. Analysts are saying these duties could jeopardize up to potentially 70% of India's exports to the U.S. That's a massive chunk. Leading Indian economic think tanks like iCrier are already urging market diversification, trade reform. Basically, don't rely so much on the U.S. market.
And are we seeing actual effects already?
We are. There's a definite chill in foreign investment. Some companies that were looking at relocating supply chains to India, part of that China Plus One strategy, well, some of those plans seem to be stalling. Investments from firms like Pasha, Cradlewise, they're mentioned as examples, and key sectors, especially labor-intensive ones, are really bracing for impact. Textiles, shrimp, leather, footwear, gems, and jewelry. Cressel Ratings, for instance, estimates India's natural diamond polishing industry could see a huge revenue drop this fiscal year, maybe 28 to 30%, down to around $12.5 billion.
Wow, 28 to 30%. That's significant job impact territory.
Absolutely. And on the financial markets front, India's main stock benchmarks, the Nifty 50 and Sensex, they slumped pretty sharply on August 29th. It reflected deep investor concern. The Indian rupee has also weakened against the dollar, and experts are predicting a noticeable hit to India's GDP growth for the next fiscal year, maybe up to 40 basis points shaved off, mostly due to lower investor confidence and weaker export performance. So yeah, it's not just a minor blip, it's a real economic headwind.
Okay, so significant economic pressure. But you said India isn't backing down.
Not at all. Defiance seems to be the key theme. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has assured exporters of comprehensive support. The focus is on protecting livelihoods. There are interministerial meetings exploring all sorts of measures, export promotion missions, maybe moratoriums on export loans, emergency credit lines for smaller exporters, MSMEs. And they've extended duty-free cotton imports until the end of 2025 to help the textile industry specifically.
So practical support measures, but also a strong political stance.
Very strong. India actually plans to increase Russian oil imports by 10–20% in September, despite the tariffs. That's sending a clear message. Trade Minister Piyush Goyal stated it very plainly. India will not bow down to the U.S. He said they'll capture new markets instead, and even confidently predicted that India's exports this year will exceed the previous year's numbers.
That's fighting talk. What about domestically? Is there support for this tough stance?
Yeah, it seems pretty broad-based. We're seeing a kind of rallying cry. Mohan Bhagwat, the chief of the RSS, a very influential nationalist organization, he pitched for Swadeshi, basically self-reliance, engaging internationally by choice, not under pressure. Even opposition figures like Arvind Kejriwal urged the central government to hit back with even higher tariffs on U.S. imports, suggesting doubling them to 100%. And the chairman of Maruti Suzuki India, R.C. Bhargava, called for the nation to unite and resist what he called bullying. So it taps into national sentiment.
Interesting. So support across different sections. What about the institutions like the central bank?
The Reserve Bank of India governor, Sanjay Malhotra, has said the RBI has measures ready to protect the economy. They plan to talk with industry reps soon. Now, the finance ministry did caution about secondary and longer-term effects, which is realistic. But the commerce minister, Goyal, expressed optimism, saying he doesn't think it will be a very long-term loss.
Okay, and there was something about a U.S. court ruling. Does that affect this?
Potentially. It's interesting timing. On August 30th, a U.S. Court of Appeals largely upheld an earlier decision. It found President Trump had overstepped his authority when he imposed those universal tariffs on basically all trading partners a while back. Not the India-specific ones, but the broader policy. Now, that policy technically stays in place until mid-October, and there'll likely be an appeal to the Supreme Court. But it does hint that there are domestic legal challenges brewing against this kind of broad tariff approach within the U.S. itself. Doesn't directly stop the India tariffs yet, but it adds another layer.
All right, okay, let's maybe zoom out a bit then. Look at the bigger geopolitical picture. This crisis, It's clearly put a massive strain on the U.S.-India relationship, strategically, politically. You mentioned analysts like Michael Kugelman calling it the worst crisis in 2 decades. That's serious.
Hmm.
The Financial Times even compared it to the tensions after India's 1998 nuclear tests.
Yeah.
They talked about a disturbing personalization of diplomacy and strategic divergence. That sounds like trust has really broken down.
Absolutely. Trust seems to be the key casualty here. Stepping back, you really see how this America First approach, as applied here, clashes with decades of bipartisan U.S. effort to build that strategic partnership with India. Voices like Fareed Zakaria argue it risks pushing India closer to Russia and China, the very outcome the partnership was partly meant to avoid. Zakaria even quoted Trump apparently referring to India's economy as dead, which is quite something.
Whoa.
Yeah. And former U.S. Ambassador to India, Kenneth Jester, he echoed the concerns, noted widespread surprise and, frankly, indignation in India. Especially, he pointed out, because these tariffs also hurt American companies and consumers. Think textiles, auto parts costs go up for them too. Even Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador, warned that wrecking the U.S.-India relationship would be a strategic disaster, especially regarding countering China.
So, serious warnings from experienced figures. What about the ripple effects on things like the Quad? That seemed like a cornerstone of the relationship.
Huge implications there. It's put the Quad cooperation under serious strain. There were reports India paused major U.S. defense deals. We're talking about $3.6 billion worth, potentially including Stryker vehicles, Boeing aircraft. Now, the Indian government later denied halting any plans, but the reports themselves show the level of tension. More significantly, though, these tensions have cast real doubt over the upcoming Quad Leaders Summit. New Delhi has delayed confirming dates. That risks undermining the whole multilateral coordination effort in the Indo-Pacific.
And didn't the New York Times report something about Trump's plans?
Yes, they claimed President Trump no longer has plans to visit India for that Quad summit. If true, that's a major blow to the forum's momentum.
Okay, so the Quad is definitely shaky. How are the other Quad members reacting? Australia, Japan.
While Australia has weighed in, Foreign Minister Penny Wong stated clearly that Australia doesn't support tariffs, believes in open trade. She emphasized Australia's commitment to a strong partnership with India and support for the Quad, kind of trying to smooth things over. Back in the U.S., there's criticism, too. House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats slammed the 50% tariffs. They argued it hurts Americans, sabotages the U.S.-India relationship, and they asked why target India so harshly when China buys even more Russian oil.
That's a fair question.
And a major U.S. think tank, the Atlantic Council, put out a stark warning. They said U.S. overreach on trade and energy risks completely unraveling a partnership that was carefully built, largely to counter China. Their argument is the Trump administration just misjudged India's economic needs and strategic thinking. And using these coercive tactics, it's backfired, weakened U.S. credibility, undermined broader goals.
So with this strain, this friction with the U.S., is India actively, pivoting, looking towards other partners more seriously?
It certainly raises that question. India has always pursued this multipolar alignment, balancing ties with the West, Russia, China. Now, this crisis could potentially reinforce its relationships outside the Western sphere, with Russia, China, other groupings. We've actually seen a diplomatic overture from Beijing, interestingly. Back in March, President Xi Jinping sent a letter to India's President Murmu, exploring ways to strengthen bilateral ties and also expressing concerns about U.S. agreements that might affect Chinese interests.
China reaching out. And what about investment?
Well, there's just talk for now, it seems, but talk of India possibly relaxing certain foreign direct investment, FDI restrictions on Chinese investments. ETI Ayog, that key Indian policy think tank, apparently proposed maybe scrapping the need for mandatory prior government approval for Chinese FDI up to 24%.
Okay.
That would be a shift.
Okay, that's significant if it happens. And isn't Modi going to China soon?
Yes, perhaps the most symbolic development right now is Prime Minister Modi's scheduled attendance at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO summit. It's happening in Tianjin, China, basically right now, August 31st to September 1st. This is his first visit to China in 7 years, and he's expected to hold talks with President Xi Jinping there.
The SDO. That started as a security thing, right?
Originally, yes, primarily security-focused. But its mandate has really expanded. Now it includes trade, broader global south concerns, and its members represent a huge chunk of the world, 43% of the population, 23% of the global economy. Analysts see this summit as a big platform for China, a chance to project itself as a stabilizing force, kind of uniting the global south to counterbalance the West. So you can bet the U.S. will be watching Modi's interactions with Xi at the SKO very closely. Especially with these tariffs hanging in the air and the Quad summit looking uncertain, it really does feel like a high-stakes geopolitical game unfolding.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's try and summarize where things stand right now.
Right. So, as of now, mid to late August 2025, those 50% U.S. tariffs on India are in place. There's no formal resolution in sight. Analysts stress the relationship is complex. There's always possibility for recalibration, but clearly, trust has taken a big hit. India's trade minister, as we heard, is adamant. India will not bow down. They plan to find new markets, expect exports to grow anyway. But despite all this tension, you did have U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressing some optimism, saying, at the end of the day, we will come together. So maybe a sliver of hope for de-escalation.
Maybe. We'll have to see. So wrapping up, what does this all mean for you, our listener?
Well, this crisis is, I think, a really powerful illustration of just how delicate international relations are. How economic policy, energy security, geopolitics, they're all deeply tangled together. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that even partnerships that look strong, built over decades, can unravel pretty quickly when trust breaks down and diplomacy gets, well, personalized. You have the America First strategy colliding head-on with India's strategic autonomy. It's forcing a big reevaluation of global alliances. Could genuinely reshape the future world order. So, something to think about. What do you think these developments mean for the future of global trade and alliances? Will India manage to diversify its markets effectively? Or will this crisis push it much closer, perhaps irrevocably, towards other blocs like BRICS or the ESCO? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you a clearer picture of this very complex, very current situation.
Until next time, keep digging deeper into the issues that shape our world.